Hello there, my sleep fellows. Tonight, we return once again to the warm, flickering corridors of Hogwarts, a place where staircases shift, portraits whisper, and even the moonlight has secrets to share. But this isn't a tale of daring duels or dangerous spells. No, this is a quieter kind of magic. The kind that waits patiently in shadows, hums softly through old stone, and reveals itself only to those who are still enough to notice. Tonight, we will wander through the winding towers of Gryffindor House, where the fire always crackles gently in the common room, and the windows stretch out toward the sky like sleepy eyes watching the world. Most of them are just windows, simple glass panes set in thick stone, but there is one tucked in a quiet corner of the boys' dormitory that has long been whispered about. A window that doesn't open, a window that never fogs, a window that sometimes reflects more than what's in front of it. This is the story of that window. But it doesn't begin with curses or fear. It begins with curiosity, with friendship, and with a quiet October evening when the air smelled of old parchment, warm treacle, and the last golden leaves of autumn falling past the tower walls. You'll walk slowly through this story. You'll listen to the rustle of dormitory curtains, the soft clink of teacups in the common room, and the hush of secrets that want only to be gently understood. So, if you're ready, tuck yourself beneath your blankets. Let your breathing slow. Let the hum of the magical world wrap around you like a well-worn cloak. There is nothing to fear in this story, only mystery, warmth, and the gentle reminder that even the quietest things in Hogwarts can hold a little wonder. And if you enjoy stories like this, tales of slow magic and cozy secrets, of soft footsteps and flickering candlelight, feel free to like this tale, subscribe for more, or simply return here whenever the night feels long and you wish to walk once more through the enchanted halls of Hogwarts. Now then, let us begin. There's a window in Gryffindor Tower, and tonight it will show something it hasn't revealed in many years, but only to those who are watching gently and dreaming deeply. Our story gently centers around Neville Longbottom, though not the clumsy first year everyone once whispered about in the corridors. No, this is the Neville of later years at Hogwarts, softer in voice but steadier in heart. A boy who had grown slowly into his courage, like ivy curling up an old brick wall, humble and unnoticed, but always reaching upward. He was never one to seek adventure, and perhaps that's why adventures, the quieter kind, found him. Neville had always liked the quiet parts of Hogwarts, the tucked-away alcoves filled with forgotten potted plants, the empty classrooms with chalk dust floating lazily in golden sunlight, and the long, lonely windows in Gryffindor Tower that offered views of the world far below, of drifting clouds and tiny dots that were Hogsmeade chimneys. The castle didn't feel haunted to him. It felt kind. Old, yes, but kind. He shared his dormitory with Seamus Finnegan, who snored like a kettle left too long on the stove, and Dean Thomas, who often fell asleep sketching by candlelight, his parchment dotted with little dragons and shields. There was always a kind of gentle rhythm in their room, Dean humming under his breath, Seamus mumbling half spells in his sleep. Neville would sit on his bed by the far wall, the one closest to the strange window, writing in his plant journal or tending to his magical herbs with a soft hum of his own. The cursed window, as Seamus called it, sat at the end of their dormitory, framed in thick velvet curtains that no one ever drew closed. It was just a part of the room, quiet and unmoving, always clean no matter the weather, always cool to the touch. Sometimes Neville would stare at it, watching how it never frosted over in winter like the others. But he never mentioned it much. Some mysteries, he thought, didn't mind being left alone. Their days were gentle that term. Classes passed in a sleepy rhythm. Herbology in the misty greenhouses, history of magic in Professor Bin's slow and dreamy drone, and late evenings spent curled near the fire, listening to Ginny Weasley tell stories that always made Seamus jump. But Neville had begun to feel something, a soft tug, a quiet awareness, as though the window at the end of their room was not just reflecting the world, but remembering it. He hadn't said anything to the others, not yet. For now, he simply watched, and the window watched back. It began, as all magical oddities often do, on a softly raining evening. The common room of Gryffindor Tower was unusually quiet. The fire murmured in the hearth with a low, comforting crackle, casting slow, moving shadows across the carved stone walls. Outside, the rain drizzled down the tall, curved windows, creating trails of silver against the glass. Most students had gone to bed early, lulled by the gentle rhythm of rain and the warmth of the common room's fire. Neville, however, remained in the boys' dormitory, cross-legged on his bed with a small pot of moondew blossoms beside him. He was tending to them with a quiet focus, gently brushing each petal with his wand tip. The plant purred ever so slightly at the contact. Not a real sound, but something soft and magical you felt more than heard. Neville smiled to himself and glanced up for just a moment, and then frowned. The window, the one at the far end of their dormitory, had changed. It was subtle at first, a faint difference in the color of the moonlight it let in, as though it wasn't quite matching the rest of the windows in the tower. While the others reflected the soft silver light of the crescent moon, this one glowed with a faint, bluish tint, like starlight seen through water. Neville tilted his head. The rain, he realized, wasn't hitting this window at all. Every other pane was streaked and fogged, but the one in question remained perfectly clear. Too clear. He stood quietly and padded across the wooden floor, slippers silent against the old boards. He stopped in front of the window and reached out with one finger. The glass was cool, not cold, cool, like stone just before dawn. He leaned in a little, peering out. What he saw wasn't the courtyard. Instead of the usual view, the winding stone path, the flickering lanterns, the distant spires of Hogsmeade, there was something else. A forest. Not the forbidden forest, though. This one shimmered in soft pastel colors, like it had been painted in moonlight and then gently stirred with a brush. Trees swayed slowly, their leaves sparkling faintly with dew. There were no animals, no sound, just a glowing, peaceful wood under an unfamiliar sky. Neville blinked, then looked over his shoulder. The other windows still showed Hogwarts as it was, rain gently falling, towers dark and sleepy, lanterns twinkling in puddles. But this one, no, this one was somewhere else. He stepped back. For a long moment, he said nothing, just watched. The trees beyond the glass didn't move quickly. They shifted as though dreaming, and in the center of the forest, just at the edge of what the glass would show, stood a stone archway wrapped in ivy and light. It pulsed, softly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. That night, Neville didn't sleep. Instead, he stayed near the window, wrapped in his blanket, watching. He didn't wake Seamus or Dean. Somehow it felt like this was his to see, not out of secrecy, but out of gentleness. Like the window had chosen to open for him, and to rush it or expose it too soon would be wrong. In the days that followed, Neville checked the window often. Sometimes it showed only the usual view, but then, late at night, or when he was alone and the tower was quiet, it would change again. Always to that forest, always with the pulsing archway in the distance. On the third night, something changed. As Neville approached the window after curfew, he noticed a glow coming from the edge of the glass. Not from the moon outside, but from within. It shimmered like a memory, soft, golden strands floating along the edge. He stepped closer, and the moment he placed his palm against the glass, it rippled, not like a rock in a pond, but like cloth in the wind. The surface of the window fluttered beneath his touch. His breath caught. He leaned in. A whisper. It wasn't a voice. Not really. More like the feeling of a whisper, curling around his ears without sound. Not all doors are meant to open. Neville stepped back sharply, heart ticking a little faster than usual, but not in fear. It was more like his heartbeat had matched the rhythm of the whisper, like he was part of whatever the window was remembering. He didn't try to speak back. He only bowed his head slightly and whispered, "I understand." The window glowed for just a second longer, then went still. From that night onward, Neville noticed little things, how his dreams became more vivid when he slept near the window, how he would wake up with faint images of the glowing forest still fading behind his eyes. He started sketching what he saw, not with perfect lines, but with soft charcoal smudges. The archway, the trees, the strange sky. One afternoon, when he was alone in the dormitory, he showed the drawing to Professor Sprout during a quiet break in the greenhouses. She studied it carefully, fingers tracing the outline of the archway. "Some say there are places in this castle," she murmured, "that remember things not from our time, but from time itself. Some magic is deeper than spells, Neville. It's in the stone, in the glass." Neville nodded. He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. By now, the window had stopped showing the Hogwarts courtyard altogether. Every evening, when Neville returned from dinner, it shimmered gently, revealing that same glowing forest under the softest of moons. The view never changed much, but the archway, it seemed closer, or perhaps he was getting closer to it. One quiet morning, Seamus stirred from sleep and yawned. "Oi, Neville," he mumbled, half asleep. "Why's your blanket glowing?" Neville glanced down. His blanket wasn't glowing, but the edge of his bed, the one nearest the window, held a faint shimmer, a soft, pulsing light that faded as quickly as it came. He smiled gently. Must have been a trick of the light. Seamus was already snoring again before he could answer, and Neville sat back on his bed, eyes fixed on the window. The archway in the distance pulsed once, a little brighter than before. The nights had begun to grow quieter still, and Neville's thoughts often drifted before sleep, not toward homework, not even toward his plants, but toward the archway in the glowing forest. It had become more than a mystery. It was a presence in his life, like a song only he could hear faintly humming behind everything. One evening, as he walked back from the greenhouse alone, something curious caught his eye. The portraits in the corridor were asleep, as they often were at night. But one, an old wizard with bushy white eyebrows and a star-covered hat, was wide awake, leaning forward in his frame and watching Neville with an uncommon intensity. Neville slowed. "Evening," he offered gently. The portrait didn't respond right away, only tapped his finger slowly on the painted windowsill inside his frame. "Bit late to be wandering, isn't it?" the wizard finally said. Neville smiled. "Just coming back from the greenhouses." The portrait narrowed his eyes. "Strange weather this week. For spring." Neville glanced at the windows. "Rain's been soft." The wizard in the painting leaned closer, voice lowering. "Some doors open on soft rain." Neville stopped. "What did you say?" But the portrait was now pretending to snore, hat tilted over his eyes. Neville blinked, shook his head, and continued toward the tower, but the words stayed with him. Some doors open on soft rain. That night, the cursed window shimmered again. Neville sat on the edge of his bed, wrapped in a worn woolen blanket, and watched. The archway in the distance pulsed gently, as always. But then, a second archway appeared, faint as mist, to the left of the first, just behind a tree. He was sure of it. It wasn't there before. He blinked. Still there. This one was smaller, twisted. The ivy that wrapped it hung low, almost like it was weeping. The glow was cooler too, tinged blue, as though it mourned something. Neville leaned forward. In that moment, something flickered. A shape, no, a silhouette, moved through the archway and vanished among the trees. He stood suddenly, heart thumping. He hadn't imagined it. And then, a soft knock. Not at the dormitory door, from inside the wall, from behind the window. The knock was barely audible, like a memory trying to break through. Neville reached out slowly, hand trembling slightly, and touched the glass. The knock repeated, quieter this time, almost like it was asking permission. Then, a whisper again, but not a voice, a feeling. "Open from within." Neville whispered back. "How?" The room held its breath. Then, faint as dew, a line of light appeared around the edge of the window. Not outside it, inside the dormitory wall itself. Like something buried in the stone had decided to reveal itself. The line pulsed, a hidden seam. Neville, moving slowly as if in a dream, reached for his wand and tapped the center of the pane. Not with a spell, just a touch. And then, very gently, he whispered, "A parry." The window didn't swing open. It dissolved. The frame remained, but the glass simply faded into a slow mist. disappearing from the frame like dew in the morning sun. Behind it wasn't air, it wasn't outside, it was a corridor, stone, dark, curved like a spiral, but lined with soft moss and tiny specks of light drifting through the air like fireflies. The corridor sloped downward gently, as if inviting him in. Neville hesitated. He looked back. Dean and Seamus were sleeping soundly, unaware. The fire in the common room had burned low. The hour was late. But something within him, something deeper than curiosity, whispered to follow. He stepped through the frame. The moment he crossed into the corridor, the air changed. It felt warmer, not in temperature, but in emotion. Like the corridor was happy he had arrived. The stones beneath his feet were ancient, but gentle. They didn't echo. Instead, each footstep sounded muffled, like walking on layered moss or memory. The lights hovering in the air swirled softly around him, illuminating carved symbols in the stone that pulsed faintly as he passed. Symbols not in any language he knew, yet still somehow familiar, like the way a lullaby feels known even if you've never heard it before. He walked slowly, the corridor winding downward like a seashell. Time felt different here, not slower, not faster, just deeper. Finally, the corridor opened into a round chamber. It was small, only large enough for a few people to stand in comfortably. In the center, on a raised stone pedestal, sat a tiny orb of light, no larger than a snitch. It floated an inch above the pedestal, glowing a soft rose gold. Neville stepped closer. As he neared, the orb shimmered and cast a projection, not up into the air, but into his mind. Images, memories, but not his. He saw flashes of an old Hogwarts, much older, stone pucker with age, students in robes that shimmered with enchantments long since forgotten, professors moving like whispers, and there, just for a heartbeat, he saw a boy standing before the same archway in the forest. The boy was afraid, alone, but he stepped forward anyway, and just as he crossed the arch, the vision faded. Neville opened his eyes. The orb still floated, but it now glowed with a steady rhythm, matching his heartbeat. He whispered, "What is this place?" The room didn't answer, but he felt something change behind him. Turning, he saw the corridor had vanished, replaced now by a smooth wall of stone. No window, no passage, just him and the orb. Panic tickled the edges of his chest, but before it could take hold, the orb dimmed slightly, and another corridor opened, this time leading upward. He followed. When he emerged, blinking, he was back in the dormitory, but not where he left. He stood near the fireplace, not by the window, and the cursed window, gone. Where it once was, now stood a bare stone wall. Neville stared, heart quiet but confused. Had it sealed, moved? But then he looked down. In his hand, he hadn't even realized he'd picked it up, was the orb. But now it wasn't floating. It had solidified into a small pendant, warm and smooth, tied to a thin silver thread. He tucked it away into his pajama pocket and sat on the couch near the hearth. The fire flared gently. The tower was still. Whatever had happened wasn't meant to be understood all at once, but something had shifted. The second archway, the silhouette, the corridor in the wall, the orb, and that strange whispering phrase opened from within. He would not speak of it yet, not to his friends, not even to Professor Sprout. Some magic asked for patience. Some answers only came when you were quiet enough inside to hear them. And so, as the last embers of the fire drifted into sleep, Neville leaned back, eyes soft, the pendant resting against his chest, glowing ever so faintly in rhythm with the heart of the castle itself. The days that followed were quiet, almost too quiet. Not in the usual way that Hogwarts quiets down between classes or just before the holidays, but in a hush that hummed beneath the skin. It was as if the castle itself was holding its breath. Harry felt it every time he passed the hallway where the invisible door had once shimmered, no longer visible, no longer humming, but ever present in his mind. He hadn't returned to the corridor since the night of the first encounter. Something about it felt sacred, or perhaps sealed by something older than permission. Yet curiosity, it stirred like leaves in a gentle wind. Harry found himself sketching the runes he remembered seeing in the shimmer, absent-mindedly drawing them in the corners of his notes during Professor Flitwick's charms class, or while waiting for a gobstone match to start. Hermione, of course, noticed first. "Those aren't just idle doodles," she said one afternoon, her eyes narrowing over the edge of her book in the common room. "Those are constraint glyphs, old ones. You know that, right?" Harry looked down at his parchment. The glyphs curled like vines, dancing around a central circle he hadn't even realized he was forming. "I didn't mean to," he admitted softly. "That's often how the best enchantments call to you," she replied gently. "Subconsciously, they whisper until you listen." Ron leaned back in his chair nearby, a biscuit halfway to his mouth. "Are we talking about haunted doodles now?" Hermione sighed but smiled. "It's more like magical suggestion. Some wards or enchantments draw the attention of those attuned to them." "Attuned? You mean like Harry?" Hermione nodded, her voice quieter. "He's always had a connection to the deeper magics of Hogwarts. It's no surprise." Harry didn't feel particularly magical at that moment, just unusually tired. A quiet magic had seeped into his days, never frightening, but present. He began noticing odd patterns in the castle's sounds, footsteps echoing too late, whispers that began when no one was nearby. The paintings in the stairwell above the third-floor landing seemed to turn their heads a little more slowly when he passed, as if watching. It was subtle, gentle, but unmistakable, and it wasn't only Harry. Neville caught up with them one morning, looking unusually pale. Does anyone else feel drawn somewhere? Like something keeps tugging your thoughts even when you try to focus? Harry and Hermione exchanged a look. Ron just blinked. Like when I smell treacle tart and can't think of anything else? Not exactly, Neville replied, eyes darting. I was heading to Greenhouse 3, but I walked 3 floors in the wrong direction without realizing it. Ended up near that hallway with the moving gargoyle, except it wasn't there. Hermione stood. That confirms it. Confirms what? Ron asked. There's still magic active, she whispered. Not dangerous, at least not yet, but something is trying to reach out. That night, the trio decided to visit the corridor again, this time more prepared, with protective spells and alert minds. The halls were dimly lit by floating lanterns, their glow soft like candlelight in a dream. As they approached the hallway, the temperature shifted, not colder, but heavier, like walking into memory. The wall where the invisible door had once appeared looked no different from the others, yet Harry felt it before he saw it. A faint shimmer, barely perceptible, hovered near the stone. This time, Hermione was ready. She raised her wand and whispered, "Revelio Memoria." Nothing happened at first. Then slowly, as though responding to kindness rather than command, the shimmer expanded. Soft blue lines traced an arch in the stone, revealing an outline of the door once more, still invisible, yet now remembered. The door didn't open, but it didn't vanish either. It waited. "What do you think it wants?" Ron asked, keeping a safe distance. "I don't know," Hermione said, squinting, "but it isn't aggressive. It's almost lonely." They sat there for a while, just three friends beneath the lantern's gentle glow, watching the memory of a door they couldn't open. Occasionally, a whisper would brush the air, not words, but feelings, a sense of longing, of patience. Harry finally stood and placed his hand gently near the shimmer, not on it, just near enough to feel its presence. It pulsed once, then faded, and the wall became still. The next day, odd things began to happen across the castle. Peeves, the poltergeist, was nowhere to be found. Nearly Headless Nick mentioned that a passage from the second floor to the library's forgotten wing had reopened on its own, one that hadn't functioned since 1854. A suit of armor near the owlery polished itself for the first time in centuries, though no spell had been cast. "It's like something is waking up," Hermione murmured one afternoon, gently, respectfully. McGonagall noticed too. She called Harry to her office with a raised eyebrow. "I presume you've been near certain corridors lately," she said as he sat across from her, "the ones that tend to react to your presence." Harry hesitated. "A little." She sighed. "Hogwarts has rooms that open only for those who ask the right questions, or who carry the right memories." "You've known about the invisible door?" "Not that specific one," she said with a faint smile. "But I trust the castle. If it's showing you something, it has a reason." She paused, her gaze softening. "Just tread gently, Potter. Some doors protect not what lies beyond, but the world from what was once remembered there." Harry left her office with more questions than answers, but also a sense of comfort. The castle was not scolding him. It was sharing with him something old, something sacred. That evening, as twilight melted into velvet night, Harry walked the castle alone. He followed the whispers, not with urgency, but with reverence, letting the castle lead. Past moving staircases and enchanted chandeliers, past paintings that murmured old songs, until he reached the corridor once more. He closed his eyes, and in the quiet, he whispered, "I'm listening." The silence answered, not with words, but with a hum, a resonance in the stone, a kindness in the walls, as if the castle smiled, and far, far behind the shimmer of the invisible door, something shifted, something waited to be remembered. The days that followed brought a change in the rhythm of life at Hogwarts, as if the castle itself had turned the page in a book no one realized they were reading. The shimmer of the invisible door had become less mysterious and more familiar, like a hush in a library, not meant to scare, but to invite silence and reflection. Harry, Hermione, and Ron found themselves drawn to the corridor again and again, not with the urgency of solving a mystery, but with the quiet curiosity of those reading a forgotten story. And slowly, as if peeling past the layers of old enchantment, Hogwarts responded in kind. They didn't try to open the door again, not yet. Instead, they explored its surroundings, inch by inch. Hermione mapped out the floor tiles leading up to the shimmer. Some were colder than others, some etched faintly with worn symbols almost lost to time. She sketched each one carefully, her eyes full of gentle determination. Ron, more practically inclined, examined the walls for seams or hinges, occasionally tapping with the end of his wand. "I don't reckon this is a classroom anyone's taught in for the last couple 100 years," he murmured one evening. "Feels more like a memory than a room." Harry simply listened, to the stone, to the air, to the feelings that stirred quietly around him when he stood near the invisible arch. Then, one afternoon, as soft autumn sunlight streamed through the tall windows, Neville approached them with a folded piece of parchment. "I think this is for you," he said shyly, offering it to Harry. "It was tucked behind a book on magical botany I was using." Harry opened it slowly. The parchment was old, and the ink faded, but it was legible, a single sentence written in elegant, curving script. "Some rooms open not with keys or spells, but with choices." They all stood in silence for a moment, letting the words settle. "Choices," Hermione repeated, eyebrows furrowing. "Not passwords, not enchantments, choices." Ron leaned back against the wall. "Like, what kind of toothpaste you use?" Harry smiled faintly. "I think it means something deeper." And so, they began to wonder, not just about the room, but about themselves. What choices had they made that brought them here? Why them? Why now? That evening, Hermione suggested they each return to the corridor alone, one by one, and simply sit near the door. If this place responds to thoughts or intent, it might show us different things depending on who approaches. Ron went first. He brought with him a small bag of sweets and a half-finished essay, muttering that if the door wanted to meet him, it might as well do it while he was snacking. He sat for 20 minutes, chuckling softly as he told the shimmering arch about the time he'd accidentally turned his own wand into a soggy sock. Nothing happened, but later he'd tell Harry he felt oddly refreshed, as though someone had listened to him kindly and without judgment. Hermione went the next night. She came prepared, of course, with questions written neatly in a journal, runes to test, enchantments to gently probe. She sat down, opened her book, and whispered into the stillness. "If this is a place of memory, I'd like to understand what you're holding." She reported no visions, no voices, but her eyes sparkled more brightly when she returned. "It was like the walls were remembering with me," she said dreamily. When it came time for Harry, he didn't bring anything. He went quietly. He sat down in front of the shimmer, his back resting against the opposite wall, and simply breathed. He thought about his time at Hogwarts, not the battles, not the legends, but the quiet moments, watching snow fall outside the common room window, hearing Fox's song echo in Dumbledore's office, walking beside Hagrid under the stars. "I choose kindness," he whispered. The shimmer pulsed, just once, gentle, warm, like a sigh of recognition. Over the next few days, others were drawn in too. Luna, with her airy wonder, Neville, with his grounded compassion, even Ginny, who approached the shimmer with a mixture of boldness and curiosity. Each of them made a quiet choice, and each was acknowledged with a faint glow in return. Eventually, they realized the door was not meant to open in the usual way, not like the room of requirement or the kitchens behind the fruit painting. It was a door of reflection, a mirror not of face but of heart, a space that didn't demand proof of power or brilliance, but proof of gentleness. One evening, just before dinner, McGonagall joined them in the corridor. She said nothing for a while, simply watching the shimmer. Then softly she said, "This room, it first appeared during the founding of Hogwarts. It's always been here, yet never always open. It chooses its own time, its own keepers." Hermione turned. "What's inside?" "A memory," the professor said with quiet reverence. "But it's not mine to reveal. It belongs to the castle, and perhaps to you." Harry glanced at Ron and Hermione. He felt no fear, only peace. That night, they didn't try to open the door again. Instead, they left a note, tucked gently into the edge of the stonework. It read, "We don't need to see inside to believe in what's there. We choose to wait, and we choose to listen." As they walked back toward the great hall, the shimmer behind them pulsed once more, a soft, glowing heartbeat in the wall. And within the invisible classroom, long untouched by footstep or spell, an old lantern flickered to life, just once, casting a warm glow across empty desks, waiting patiently in time. The days grew quieter as autumn deepened, and the castle settled into that dreamy hush it always wore when the wind grew colder and leaves rustled like whispers through the grounds. The shimmering doorway had stopped glowing, not gone, just resting. The students still passed it with quiet curiosity, but the urgency to open it had faded, replaced by a calm knowing that whatever waited inside would reveal itself in its own time. Then, one evening, when the moon hung low and golden over the black lake, Harry found himself drawn once more to the corridor. He wasn't searching for answers anymore. He was simply remembering. The hall was empty. The portraits nearby were asleep, their painted eyes closed in peaceful slumber. He sat down on the same spot as before, his back to the stone wall, facing the shimmer. For a moment, all was still. Then, softly, a sound, faint as a breeze stirring parchment, echoed through the corridor. He looked up. The shimmer was pulsing, slowly, gently, inviting. Harry stood, but instead of reaching for it, he closed his eyes, and something remarkable happened. He didn't step through the door stepped into him. A vision unfolded, not with blinding light, but with quiet softness, like a dream one slips into rather than awakens from. He saw a room, long forgotten, bathed in candlelight, desks in a circle, not in rows, no blackboard, No strict posture, just warmth. Shelves of books not on spells, but on kindness, empathy, magical ethics. A window showing stars that shimmered as though painted with soft brushstrokes. In the center, an old witch, gentle-eyed, her hair silver as moonlight, spoke to a small group of young students. She was teaching not how to cast spells, but how to use them with compassion. Harry heard her voice, though she never moved her lips. Magic is not power, it is promise, and promises are meant to be held gently. The room flickered, then shifted. He saw 4 figures, familiar, yet younger. Godric Gryffindor with a soft, thoughtful face. Helga Hufflepuff, smiling with warmth that filled the room. Rowena Ravenclaw, her eyes like deep lakes of wisdom. And Salazar Slytherin, not sharp or proud, but distant and sorrowful. They stood where the teacher had been. This, Harry realized, was their classroom once, their shared space, their secret place. And it was here, in this small, invisible room, that they once taught the truest forms of magic, not incantations, but choices. He saw flashes, moments of the founders not arguing, but laughing, sharing books, disagreeing gently, talking about the burden of creating a school, the responsibility, and then the slow fracture. Salazar stepping back, Rowena turning away, Helga crying softly, Godric watching in silence, his hand pressed against the stone wall, the same wall Harry had sat against. The shimmer faded. Harry opened his eyes. He was back in the corridor, alone, but changed. He didn't need to speak. He didn't need to write. The vision had been a gift, a memory passed not by force, but by invitation. The next morning, he gathered Ron and Hermione in the courtyard, where sunlight broke through the thinning autumn leaves. "I saw the room," he said quietly. "It's a memory, a place they created, not to hide from the world, but to hold something safe, a reminder of who they were before everything changed." Hermione's eyes filled with tears. They were friends, before the legends, before the house rivalry. Ron nodded slowly, before the fights, before the sorting hat. Harry looked up at the castle windows, some fogged with warmth, others still open to the cool morning breeze. They made this school for something more than magic. They made it for kindness, for choices, for understanding. And in that moment, all 3 of them knew this wasn't a room meant to be found by accident. It was meant to be found by readiness, a place that chose those who remembered the heart of what Hogwarts stood for. Later that evening, they returned to the corridor, not to open the door, but to sit near it again, this time together. They held hands in silence, the shimmer glowing faintly before them. They didn't need to enter, because they carried the classroom now, in their thoughts, their choices, their friendships. And deep within the castle, behind the invisible veil of that forgotten door, the candlelight in the round room flickered once more. No footsteps echoed, no voices stirred, but the magic remained, soft, steady, and steady and everlasting. The days that followed were quiet ones. The corridor where the invisible door lived was no longer a mystery, no longer a question. It was simply a place, a peaceful space between lessons and laughter, between the weight of history and the lightness of now. Harry, Hermione, and Ron continued to walk by it often, not to investigate, but simply to pass by with a soft nod, as one might greet an old friend. The shimmer no longer beckoned. It breathed. It glowed faintly in the mornings, like dew on a spiderweb catching the sun. In the evenings, it softened into a warm hush, barely there, like the last memory of a dream before waking. The castle itself seemed to respond, as if Hogwarts had sighed gently, content that someone had finally remembered the truth of that forgotten room. Professor McGonagall, though she said nothing, seemed to know. One morning, as Harry lingered by the corridor, she passed by with a steaming cup of tea in her hand. She paused, glanced at the shimmer, then at him, her eyes full of quiet wisdom. "Some rooms," she said gently, "are meant to be remembered, not entered." And then she continued on, her footsteps tapping softly on the stone. Classes resumed their gentle rhythm. The leaves outside turned golden and then fell in swirls that danced in the courtyard wind. Inside, students bustled from class to class, unaware of the secret that had revealed itself not in a grand duel or shouted spell, but in silence and kindness. Hermione started spending more time in the library, not just for reading, but to search for old records, forgotten memories, small traces of Hogwarts' earliest days. She said it felt important now. Ron, in his own quiet way, began drawing maps of the castle again, marking not just passages and tricks, but emotions, places where things had felt special, sacred, not for secrets, he said once, just for remembering. And Harry slept more peacefully. Each night, he returned to his dormitory, pulled the warm covers up to his chin, and let his thoughts drift not to battles or burdens, but to that round room of candlelight and gentle voices. In his dreams, he often walked those stone halls again, only now they felt softer, less full of shadows, more full of stories. He dreamed of the founders, not as distant figures carved in legend, but as people, young, passionate, hopeful. He saw them smiling, disagreeing kindly, building something not perfect, but earnest. He dreamed of that soft voice again. Magic is not power, it is promise. And when he awoke, those words stayed with him. In time, the shimmer began to fade, not because it was forgotten, but because it had been understood. It became less visible each day, like mist lifting at dawn, until one morning it was gone entirely. But they didn't mourn it, because some magic, especially the gentle kind, lives longer when it isn't looked at too closely. It lives in choices, in friendships, in quiet remembrance, and in the hearts of those who carry stories, not for glory, but for goodness. As the night deepened, and the stars blinked softly outside the once cursed window, all was calm once more in Gryffindor Tower. The enchantment had faded, not with a burst of light or dramatic final spell, but with a gentle sigh, like the castle itself letting go of an old secret it had held too tightly for too long. The window now stood clear and still, its ancient glass quietly reflecting the moonlight, as it always should have. Harry, Hermione, and Ron sat quietly by the hearth, the flames casting golden patterns on the walls. Their voices were soft, thoughtful, filled not with excitement, but with the gentle hush of understanding. They had uncovered something not terrifying, but tender, a sadness tucked away in stone, soothed at last by care and curiosity. The fire crackled in a friendly rhythm, and the walls around them seemed to breathe easier. Even Crookshanks, curled on the rug, gave a sleepy purr and twitched one ear before drifting deeper into slumber. "It's peaceful now," Hermione whispered, her gaze lingering on the glass, like the tower has forgiven itself. Ron nodded. Whatever it was, it's over, and it didn't need fixing with a wand, just noticing. Harry said nothing. He simply looked at the window, no longer afraid of what might be reflected in it. Sometimes, he realized, the softest mysteries were the ones that mattered most. The ones that reminded you to be still, to look closer, to listen when magic whispered instead of roared. They climbed into bed quietly that night. No plans for adventure, no questions left to chase, just the comforting weight of warm blankets and a castle humming gently around them. And as the candlelight dimmed and the tower settled into silence, the breeze through the now open window carried with it a calm so deep it seemed to wrap itself around every dream drifting through the dormitory. So if you, dear listener, ever find yourself standing before a window that hums with hush and hush alone, pause for a moment. Breathe. It might just be Hogwarts, offering you a bit of its quiet magic when you need it most. Good night, and let the castle keep watch while you sleep.